Good morning and welcome to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I am your host, Frank Acom. We are broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning, and we have a lot to cover on the program this morning. Already got our first wave. Thank you very much. We're going to talk, obviously about college campuses. There's a lot of updates there. A lot of more troubling information. Not a surprise to see administration caving in a lot of ways, but we'll talk about it. We'll get in depth on that in a moment. Just as an update to a story that I have no idea why I continue to bring to you, George Santos has dropped his independent House bid. Now, a few weeks ago, I had the story where he had not received any fundraising. There are no campaign cash. So scandal-plagued former Representative George Santos dropped his independent bid on Tuesday. As you know, he faces multiple felony charges. He wrote on X that he did not want to potentially divide the Republican vote for first-term GOP Representative Nick LaLota and help the eventual Democrat nominee in the 1st Congressional District. He said exactly, and I quote, "Although Nick and I don't have the same voting record and I remain critical of his abysmal record, I don't want to split the ticket and be responsible for handing the House to Democrats." LaLota responded, Chat GPT translation, he's making a plea deal. I thought I'd bring that to you before we got into the real heavy stuff. I do ask the question, as it seems like I've been asking nearly every morning, about Mike Johnson. They claim in Politico that he's actually, quote, taming Trump and his party against all odds. Do you agree with that? We also have a few things here about the New York State budget that I think you're going to find very interesting. That coming up in a little bit. First of all, more than 100 anti-Israel Cedar in the Streets protesters, that's what they were calling themselves, were arrested during a rally near Senator Schumer's home. Now, it's interesting because we've seen, Chuck Schumer, for instance, and Nancy Pelosi just yesterday talk about fanning the flames, calling for the ouster, if you will, of Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel. Chuck Schumer recently did that, probably about a month ago. More than 100 protesters were hauled away by NYPD cops as they chanted in support of Palestine Tuesday. This was last night. They were near Chuck Schumer's home in Brooklyn. The anti-Israel protesters, including many from Jewish activist organizations, were arrested after they refused to budge from blocking traffic at Grand Army Plaza during the protest dubbed Cedar in the Streets. They linked arms together as they chanted. A lot of similar chants as you see. Now, isn't it? Again, disrupting traffic. There's a couple of pieces that we're going to get to later on in the program. There's something, and this isn't necessarily about college campuses. This is in the streets, but it's going to be interesting. And I've said this in the past about what the convention, specifically the Democratic National Convention, will look like with these kind of anti-Israel destructive protests going on. Authorities arrested the throngs of protesters without incident and led them onto MTA buses that were being used to transport them to booking, according to photos and videos at the scene. The NYPD did not immediately have the number of protesters arrested Tuesday night. Now, according to a tweet from the organizers of the Cedar in the Streets, thousands of U.S. Jews with Jewish Voice for Peace, If Not Now, and Jews for Racial and Economic Justice are holding an emergency Passover Cedar, shutting down the streets of Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer's home to demand he stop sending weapons to the Israeli government as it carries out a genocide. Protesters also projected pro-Palestinian messages off the Brooklyn Public Library, including stop funding genocide and no one is free until everyone is free. Again, with these protests, and call me naive, but I guess you have to almost erase from your mind October 7th. You have to completely ignore Hamas when you protest in these ways. That's the only way that you can't even rationalize it. I mean, that's not even the right word, but it's the only way, I suppose, that you can pretend you're fighting for a cause. I'm not even sure if that's the right word. Now, I was not excited, but there was a deadline. Columbia President Shafiq, and now we're skipping over to the school campuses. She set a deadline of midnight last night to come up with agreement, so not completely tear down the encampment, but to come to an agreement of the eventual end of the encampment. So that was at midnight, and I was kind of looking forward to, for lack of a better word, bringing you the breaking news of what happened. Well, the breaking news is that they extended the deadline. Shafiq had said the protesters had been in talks with Columbia faculty and administrators to map out a path of abandoning their camp on the Manhattan campus lawn, which has already been cleared out once before since popping up last week. Shafiq said at the time, for several days, a small group of faculty, administrators, and university senators had been in dialogue with student organizers to discuss the basis for dismantling the encampment, dispersing, and following university policies going forward. Those talks are facing a deadline of midnight tonight to reach agreement. Again, blew past the deadline, much like the New York State budget, blew past the deadline. But isn't there something to be said? And tell me if you feel this is strong. Is there something to be said about not negotiating with terrorists? And why I say it that way, they have set up this encampment. They have threatened Jewish students, made Jewish students feel uncomfortable on the campus that, again, they're paying a lot of money to attend as well. So then you capitulate and you say, okay, instead of protecting the Jewish community, instead of following the rules and ending this, suspending people, whatever the case may be, calling the police, instead of that, we are going to move classes to online. We are going to go hybrid. So already showing that weakness, signaling that weakness, and giving into what is been deemed for years now the heckler's veto. And for those of you that are not familiar, I talked about it a little bit yesterday, but heckler's veto used to be quite a big term a few years back with Antifa and other groups, and specifically on college campuses. What would happen is, let's say the young Republican group on college campus would invite a conservative speaker. Well, there'd be so many threats and so many protests that the school would do one of two things. This is the way it normally went. They'd go to the Republican organization putting it on, the young Republicans, and say, okay, if you're going to hold this, security is going to cost you, and the money was just outrageous, something that the group couldn't afford. So therefore, shutting down the speech. That would happen, or they'd end the speech because the hecklers got so bad. So that's kind of the concept of a heckler's veto. You're letting the agitators, the troublemakers, win through their threats, through sometimes their violence. And that's what happened there, where Jewish students did not feel safe. So instead of saying enough is enough, we're going to tear down this encampment, make arrests, suspend people, etc. Instead of that, they said, okay, we are going to go online. And many have said, and I will be able to get to this at some point in the program, but many have said that's essentially a breach of contract, and that parents or the students, if they're paying for their tuition, should demand refunds, should sue for breach of contract. So again, in a show of really weakness, the deadline was moved for these negotiations. Now, she's saying the negotiations were going well, but the group protesting, and this is always tough because you don't know which group actually speaks for the whole group, if any. But the group Within Our Lifetime put out a call for students and faculty to return to the campus lawn and hunker down ahead of the deadline. Quote, we are calling for students, faculty, and staff to return to the lawn within the hour, and for people of conscience across New York City to gather and protest outside of Columbia. We will not be intimidated by threats by the state. So, threats now. Now I've mentioned this in the past, and it kind of goes back when we've talked about the media, and the media that fawns over like the Woodward and Bernstein, bringing down a sitting Republican president, or they glorify, that kind of 60s protest. So they're trying to equate these to a Kent State, which they're not equatable. They're not comparable, excuse me. But that's what they're trying to do because they glorify kind of that 60s activism that has become almost mythical and epic in their minds, where these many of these people that are participating in this, specifically the professors and faculty, believe that they are going to be a part of that history, where you'll see the videos in the future on documentaries and the like. But yes, they extended the negotiations with student activists. Now, this is from CNN, so this is when they start to say things like pro-Palestinian and not anti-Israel, or in this case, student activists. Because I think it was AOC, and we'll get to a lot of this. I'm just kind of doing a quick recap this morning for you as you wake up. AOC calling them peaceful protesters, which is interesting. I guess, to me, it's not peaceful when you're calling for the death of certain people, when you're covering up your face in what is really terrorism 101. I mean, terrorist groups historically have covered up their face, much like if you look at, for instance, the Ku Klux Klan. But Columbia University says it has extended the negotiations with student activists over the dismantling of and here we go, it's CNN, pro-Palestinian encampment that has cast its campus into days of turmoil, a spokesperson for the school said. We are going to talk more about this. I know we spent a lot of time on it yesterday. I do think it's very important. I do think it's very troubling, and it is going to... Well, and it has with the protests yesterday in front of Schumer's house. It's not just going to be on college campuses. I think sometimes we do ourselves a disservice of saying, well, those crazy kids, they're blowing out some steam, not in ways that I would agree with, but, they're just kids being kids. That's not the case. When you have faculty involved, when you have people in the streets shutting down these bridges, all in the name of anti-Israel, anti-Semitism. And it is something to be very mindful of as it spreads. Cancer like this does spread. So we're going to talk more about it this morning, but I do have other topics as well. So if this isn't necessarily your cup of tea, don't worry, we've got a lot that we'll cover. And feel free to weigh in on these issues, or if you'd like to discuss something else, you see the number on the bottom of your screen. So feel free to talk about whatever you'd like, and I'll try to get to it as soon as I can. So let's take a short break, and we'll be right back as we are just getting started with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. So Columbia University did extend its negotiations, the deadline on ending the encampment. Again, just to recap, the deadline was supposed to be last night at midnight. Why they're negotiating, I'm not quite sure. Seems to be a lot of signs of weakness coming from the administration at Columbia. But the statement came early Tuesday morning after the deadline, just hours after Columbia's president announced it had given protesters a midnight deadline to reach an agreement, or the university would consider, quote, alternative options to clear the encampment. So you say, okay, you gave them a couple more hours, negotiations were getting heated. How long did you give them? The talks will now be extended another 48 hours after important progress was made, said the spokesperson. Now, this is 8 days, stretching into 8 days. Columbia President Shafiq has faced numerous calls for donors and lawmakers who believe police should be brought in to clear the encampment and restore order on campus. There was actually some Republicans that talked about bringing in the National Guard to protect Jewish students. Now, again, they are virtual. They are remote classes right now because, again, there was a caving to the bullies, to the harassers. So they should be brought in to clear the encampment and restore order at campus. That's what some lawmakers, donors, etc. are demanding. Even as students and faculty are condemning the president's similar decision last week to ask the New York Police Department to clear another student encampment. Student organizers released a statement shortly after midnight saying their representatives left the negotiations Tuesday after the university threatened to call in police and the National Guard if protesters, quote, do not acquiesce to their demands. So it's almost sounding like maybe these negotiations aren't going quite as good. Maybe they didn't make as much as important progress as they're making it sound like in the statements. because Columbia will not comment on the students' statements. Well, the president is really between a rock and a hard place because she doesn't want to lose her cash cows, the students. She doesn't want to be seen as not woke or not liberal enough to allow these anti-Israel protests to continue. But she also must realize the optics of this, how bad it looks, how scary it is for those that aren't on college campuses to realize just how filthy, how much indoctrination goes on at these college campuses. Student activists, quote, have taken steps to make the encampment welcome to all and have prohibited discriminatory or harassing language, the university said. So you notice that the university always says what the students are saying. Doesn't sound like there's no harassing language or no discrimination when you see the signs, when you see the chants, when you see the speeches that are being given. Protesters said that they won't disperse until the university agrees to cut ties with Israel academic institutions and commits to a complete divestment of Columbia's funds from entities connected to Israel. Thank you, everybody, for all these good morning waves. Isabella Ramirez, editor-in-chief of the Columbia Spectator, said there seems to be very little room in terms of where the university wants to meet the students and the students want to meet with the university. It doesn't seem like there's much room in terms of compromise. How could there be when you think about the encampment in general? I would say that protesters are screaming anti-Israel chants and anti-Semitic things and making Jewish students feel unsafe are probably not ones that are going to sit down and reasonably negotiate. I was surprised when the news broke that they were in negotiations, if I'm being honest, because there's a couple of different moving pieces there. Who actually represents the whole group? Which students are at the table? Which faculty are at the table? Is it the faculty that was also protesting with the students? Shafiq said in a release yesterday, I fully support the importance of free speech, respect the right to demonstrate, and recognize that many of the protesters have gathered peacefully. However, the encampment raises serious safety concerns, disrupts campus life, and has created a tense and at times hostile environment for many members of our community. Now, House Speaker Mike Johnson said he planned to visit Jewish students at Columbia on Wednesday, today, and hold a press conference regarding the troubling rise of virulent anti-Semitism on America's college campuses. Now, these are popping up, popping up elsewhere. Students across the United States have been protesting in solidarity with Gaza. Again, I'm sorry, you can't hear the rhetoric and say it's pro-Palestinian anymore, that it's about Gaza. You can't. These are anti-Israel protests. I know this is coming from CNN, so they're trying to twist it as well, just like you're seeing the president of Columbia and other universities twisting themselves up into a pretzel. But student, faculty, and staff, that's an important point. Students, you understand, right? Faculty and staff at the University of New Mexico peacefully protested. Again, this is coming from CNN. Monday in support of Gaza, the university said in a statement. 9 people were arrested Tuesday morning at the University of Minnesota's Twin Cities campus after they formed an encampment that went against school policy. And that's one of the things, it seems as if you would have to shut it down instantly. When you start giving in, when you start caving, when you start showing this weakness like they've seen at Columbia, it only gets worse. There's also been encampments at MIT, Emerson, and the University of California, Berkeley, no surprise, and the University of Michigan. Harvard University has closed Harvard Yard, and officials at the university suspended a pro-Palestinian student organization for allegedly violating school policies. Now, Columbia, these are the four agreement points. Columbia University issued a press statement around 3:15 this morning regarding its ongoing negotiations. I apologize, I have a frog in my throat. With anti-Israel protesters on campus. There are 4 sticking points, according to the university, which said, quote, we are making important progress with representatives of the student encampment on the West Lawn. Student protesters have committed to dismantling and removing a significant number of tents. Okay, this just reeks of weakness. Think of that term. Student protesters have committed to dismantling and removing a significant number of tents. Not all tents. Not end what is happening there. Just move, maybe take a couple tents down that they want to. Student protesters will ensure that those not affiliated with Columbia will leave Only Columbia University students will be participating in the protest. Student protesters in the encampment will comply with all requirements of FDNY with respects to activities and safety. And finally, student protesters have taken steps to make the encampment welcome to all and have prohibited discriminatory or harassing language. That's just not factually accurate. So they're trying to put the best spin on it at Columbia University, and they just can't. The PR headache here is too much, and they might think they can dupe people like us watching the news, especially if you watch CNN, where they use terms like pro-Palestinian. It's not going to work until people see that the encampment is closed down. It'll be interesting to see what Mike Johnson has to say at the press conference today. We have to take a short break. Stay with us. A few more things on this, because it is such a big issue. We'll be talking about it quite a bit. I forgot to mention, we're going to be talking with Chris Callas in the 7 o'clock hour about the upcoming college fair, which I know we're talking a lot about colleges, but there are good colleges out there, folks. And this is to help students. There will be colleges there. The police will be there. A lot of trade schools as well. I know I'm forgetting some of the groups, but it is a great thing that Chris Callas puts on each year. College Fair, May 8th, from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Elmira Elks Lodge. All right, stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. But again, this is a Ivy League school, so most of these protesters are privileged kids, and this is how they're kind of going punk rock and rebelling to show that they're the most woke by being, I don't know how this works, because I thought being woke was about kindness and understanding, but it isn't. It's got this strain of anti-Semitism now, where it's okay to hate certain groups if you're woke. As a matter of fact, somehow that proves you're the most woke. And again, this boils down to my theory, which I don't think is much of a shocking theory, that this has so much to do with kids wanting to have their pictures up online on social media showing that they're the biggest activist. That their friends back home that maybe are working or just taking their tests and keeping their head down, they want to show that those students that, no, look at me. I'm the biggest activist. I'm the one that's the most aggrieved. And that's why there's so many pictures, and you see these students at the protest, and you say, wow, these look like, without the masks on, the kind of the stereotypical fraternity or sorority student. But I'll continue. Columbia professors slammed over their grotesque rally that publicly backed the school's anti-Israel protests. This coming from the New York Post just yesterday. A group of Columbia University professors are being slammed for their grotesque decision to hold a rally that publicly backed the anti-Semitic protests. Scores of professors, and this is why, you know, when you live in a bubble, you don't get it, right? And these professors live in a bubble. They've been surrounded by yes men and women. They're students. They have to go along with everything they say. They don't, how do I want to word this? They can go down any radical rabbit hole they want because of tenure or whatever the case may be, because they have the time. They are getting paid to research, so they research. And they go down these radical rabbit holes and teach their students horrible things. But they don't understand what the real world, quote unquote, real world is like. So the optics of, at a time when so many people are calling for looks into the college campuses for this kind of indoctrination, saying that these professors are indoctrinating the students, they don't realize that maybe now is not the time to hold a rally showing support for the anti-Israel protests. It will be remembered as a shameful day in Columbia's history, Asian humanities professor David Lurie told the crowd, that being when the encampment was originally shut down. The faculty members' decision to back the protesters outraged Jewish groups who said that encampment is really a den of anti-Semites who have been abusing Jewish students. Rabbi Joseph Potosnik, said professors are supposed to be teaching subjects, not misbehavior. It's a sad commentary on the kind of professors that Columbia is hiring. They've lowered the bar. But this has been a common trend for a long time. It's not really about how good the professor is. It's really how radical they are. Those are the professors that are very much in demand on these college campuses. Now, it wasn't clear exactly how many professors appeared at Monday's walkout, though The Guardian reported there were hundreds of faculty members demonstrating. And listen to some of the... Okay, so among them were Christopher Brown. He's a history professor. History, okay. Then you've got professor of biology. Interesting. Then you've got an English and literature professor. Then you've got a women's study professor. Then you've got an urban studies professor. Now, Maria Riviera Malucci, a professor of urban studies, spoke out against the arrest. The root of word education means to lead out. But how are we leading our students out? In zip ties. Where are we leading students out? To buses, to police stations? Now, comments such as that and the general support of the anti-Israel students left Rory Lantzman, the senior counsel of the Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law, lamenting his alma mater, saying it's grotesque that we have professors who can't discern the difference between hateful, discriminatory, and violent rhetoric that violates the university's anti-discrimination policies and terrorizes a segment of the university's community, and reasoned free speech and debate. What you're witnessing at Columbia is the anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic movement at its core. Lanchman described the protesters as wannabe fascists who were trying to get their way through harassment, intimidation, and violence. And that is a good point with the fascists, because that was like, if you remember the group in the past, Antifa, called themselves anti-fascists, and what do? They were fascist in the name of anti-fascism. Several Columbia graduate students who only gave their first names also questioned the professors. I don't think it was a smart thing for them to do, said Dana. The professor siding with them, basically that tells me, okay, Columbia is not a place of discourse. It's not a place where you can peacefully argue. It's a place that sides with a very specific student body. They're just proving the point. They're proving the point of what has been said about college campuses for decades now, that it has become a place to radicalize kids. They see no problem with this hateful rhetoric. And this is a real problem moving forward, because these are the young people that are eventually going to go out into the quote-unquote real world. And this is what they've been taught. This is what they've been indoctrinated with. And they are going to vote. Now, they may not vote for Genocide Joe, as they are calling him, Joe Biden, but they're going to vote. They're going to run for office. They're going to try to change policies, and it is all based on this anti-Semitism and this hate of Israel and the hate of the Jewish community. I mean, and then you look at the weakness of the negotiations. Okay, so there was a midnight deadline last night. Now it sounds like the student group walked out. Columbia is not saying anything, but said, "Oh no, a lot of positive movement. We're going to give you 48 hours." And then we hear that 12 suspended Columbia students were reinstated just days after an anti-Israel protest. 12 Columbia University students who were suspended over an anti-Israel event on campus last month had their punishments lifted shortly after, their lawyer has claimed, as the school continues to weather backlash over its handling of protesters. It seems like they have to get something under control, but how can you get things under control when you see this weakness? And it's very similar to what we're seeing from the Biden administration, this weakness. I know Trump blamed this on Biden yesterday, but when you see him weakening on Israel, when you see people like Chuck Schumer, now Nancy Pelosi, calling for the ouster of Benjamin Netanyahu, it just signals to these students that this anti-Israel sentiment is okay. And again, this is the end of semester. The weather's breaking. Many of these kids, unfortunately, are taking up a hateful cause in the name of what they see as something fun, a party. Going out to tents. Because remember, it used to be cool in the old days, you think of a party and a keg party on college campuses and, the kind of things that are associated with that. That was a cool thing to do. Now, with the way the climate is, the cool thing to do is to be the most aggrieved. to be the most offended, to be the most woke. That actually makes you cool. That goes back to my point of why they want to be on social media with this so bad, and that's what they're ultimately their end game is. Because to be cool is no longer what you think of as a rock and roll music, booze, cigarettes, whatever. It's no longer that. To be cool is the one, the person you see, the stereotype of these protesters in your head, of the most aggrieved, the woke, the kid that is yelling and screaming at their professor, at their teacher, at the police. That's where we're at in the society. Keep that in mind when I focus on this for so long, because as you've heard me say a million times on this program was dedicated right from the early days about being about community, about building up as much as we could possibly, faith in our communities, faith in patriotism, faith in faith. So when you see this is the antithesis of that. And so I'm probably going to talk about it a little bit more. So stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here. We're just getting started, but it's almost over, the first hour. It's unbelievable. Well, halfway over. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking. Stay with us. We are back, Frankly Speaking, here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Aiken. We are broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Marcus Street in Corning. Thank you for the note. I did not realize the music was playing through. Every once in a while, it does that for some reason. That the audio doesn't fade out. I know what the problem is. I just don't always think to check it in the morning, so I do appreciate the help there. So some GOP senators are urging Biden to mobilize the National Guard to protect Jewish college students, as well as Hochul and Adams calling on them. And going back to my point about showing the weakness and really supporting, the weakness of moving the negotiations with the students for 48 more hours, the deadline, I should say, some of the kids not really getting in trouble, those type of things. But also, I think Biden's message shows these kids that it's okay what they're doing. I condemn the anti-Semitic protests. That's why I set up a program to deal with that. No one knows what that program is, by the way. I also condemn that those who don't understand what's going on with the Palestinians, about the weakest response. Now, Josh Hawley and Tom Cotton called on President Biden to mobilize the National Guard. Hawley said, "Our college campuses across the United States, Jewish students are at risk. In your statement on Passover, you stated that in recent days we've seen harassment and calls for violence against Jews. This blatant anti-Semitism is reprehensible and dangerous and has absolutely no place on college campuses or anywhere in our country. Now you must take action to match those words. You must immediately mobilize the National Guard and any other authorities necessary to ensure the safety of Jewish American students and citizens." He also referenced President Dwight Eisenhower's 1957 executive order, which deployed the Arkansas National Guard and 101st Airborne Division to ensure the safety of black students attending Central High School in Little Rock. "I urge you to similarly mobilize the National Guard and other necessary authorities to protect Jewish American students on Columbia University's campus and any other campus where Jewish students are at risk. Never again means never again." Now some are calling for tuition refunds. I think this is a good point. How am I doing on time? I know. I'm sorry, folks. We're trying to get as much in as we possibly can. Junior student at Columbia University, who's a junior, I worded that strange, Michael D'Agostino, said the hybrid classes, because we know that was another sign of giving in to essentially the demands of the anti-Israel protesters, because Jewish students didn't feel safe. The administration didn't step up to protect their safety. What they did instead was capitulate and say, okay, we're going to go hybrid. We're going to go remote. So this student said, "I'm studying applied physics and applied math, and those are classes I really benefit from being in person. I went through COVID and all of that when we were online for about a year, and it really disrupted our education." That's another good point that I think is being overlooked, that many of these students did have that year or more off with COVID, meaning the remote learning and all of that. I really think it's disheartening to see how our education is being punished as a result of this. I think it's really sad. Now, former White House Press Secretary Ari Fleischer slammed this decision, saying it's terrible how weak the school's leaders, and especially its faculty, are. The school should be fully open, no remote classes, and students who disrupt other students should be expelled. Yeah, that seems pretty simple. Former governor of Arkansas, Mike Huckabee, you know Mike Huckabee, slammed the university for allowing the anti-Israel protesters to, quote, roam around spewing genocidal chants. If a parent has a child at Columbia, they should demand a refund and then sue for breach of contract. I think that's a very good point from Mike Huckabee. I actually talked about that with some people yesterday. It's not fair to these students, especially at a time when they're taking exams, they're getting ready for what is the end of the semester, some graduating, some... Yeah, think about that too. These kids that maybe missed their high school graduation because of COVID. Now, and what's that graduation ceremony going to look like? But anyway, now graduating in their last few days of class are marred with this. But yeah, what do you think? I hadn't really thought about that. I might have mentioned it yesterday. What do you think the graduation ceremonies will look like at Columbia this year? It's the same question I've asked with what do you think, the Democratic National Convention is going to look like? Now we have been, got to take a break. Stay with us. A little bit more on this, and then we'll be done, and then we'll have other things to talk about as well. So stay with us. This is, Frankly Speaking, on Big Fox. Broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Marcus Street in Corning. This is Frankly Speaking. Thank you for joining us. AOC has called the police enforcement on the anti-Semitism protesters. She called it escalatory, reckless, and dangerous. Yes, it is, in this case, the administration's fault, the police's fault. And keep in mind, a lot of this, when we talk about anti-Israel protests, is very much the same crowd that was defund the police. This is AOC, it represents a heinous failure of leadership that puts people's lives at risk. I condemn it in the strongest possible terms. She then called the protests peaceful. Now, just to make sure to keep your mind at ease, FBI Director Christopher Wray says, no, we're not monitoring. No, we're not keeping an eye on the protesters. Well, of course, demonstrators themselves are not something that we, the FBI, get involved in. But when violence ensues, that's when we get concerned. When you have threats of violence. And so we have seen, even before October 7th, we saw a significant increase, especially in anti-Semitic threats and anti-Semitic violence. And since October 7th, that number has gone up quite substantially. So Lester Holt asked him on yesterday's NBC Nightly News, are you actively monitoring these protests? He said, we don't monitor protests, but we do share intelligence about specific threats of violence with campuses, with state and local law enforcement, but we don't monitor protests. Okay. Donald Trump yesterday said, for many years, tuition costs at colleges and universities have been exploding, and I mean absolutely exploding, while academics have been obsessed with indoctrinating America's youth. The time has come to reclaim our once great educational institutions from the radical left, and we will do that. Our secret weapon will be the college accreditation system. It's called accreditation for a reason. This is former President Trump weighing in on this. And he raises a great point about the far left, the radical left in academia, something that's been talked about for so often, but unfortunately almost has become accepted. And I'll say, if you're looking for a silver lining in this, I think, and I don't know if you can find it, but the one takeaway from it is that it's opened the eyes of a lot of people that knew that college campuses could be radical, but maybe didn't realize how radical it had become, that it is now acceptable and even encouraged by faculty and professors to hate, to discriminate, that it's become that bad. So it may have opened the eyes to many that were naive to just how radical it had become. But Trump continued, when I return to the White House, I will fire the radical left accreditors, that have allowed our colleges to become dominated by Marxist maniacs and lunatics. We will then accept applications for new accreditors who will impose real standards on colleges once again and once and for all. These standards will include defending the American tradition and Western civilization, protecting free speech, eliminating wasteful administrative positions that drive up costs incredibly, removing all Marxist diversity, equity, and inclusion bureaucrats, offering options for accelerated and low-cost degrees, provide meaningful job placement and career services, and implementing college entrance and exit exams to prove that students are actually learning and getting their money's worth. All right, last break of the hour. Stay with us. We will be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox. We've got about a little over an hour left together, so stay right there. We are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, thank you to everybody joining us. Thank you for all the waves. We are going to discuss the college campus situation a little bit more in the next hour. I just have one piece I want to bring to you and then a couple headlines just to give you an idea. But if you're just joining us, the negotiations stalled. The deadline was midnight to take down that encampment or to come up with an agreement to take down the encampment. They did not meet that midnight deadline. So the president of Colombia said, let's wait 48 more hours. And to add on to this, we talked about Biden's weak messaging towards the anti-Semitic protests. But then you had the protest last night in front of Chuck Schumer's home. Now, which I don't quite understand other than, I guess, the funding for Israel. But remember, he was calling for Benjamin Netanyahu to leave. Nancy Pelosi, maybe not being able to read the room in this scenario, calls for Netanyahu's resignation. Why would you do this right now? She said in an interview in Ireland, of all places, we recognize Israel's right to protect itself. We reject the policy and the practice of Netanyahu. Terrible. What could be worse than what he has done in response? I don't know. Boy, October 7th was pretty bad. That could be worse. She sounds like she should be at one of these protests. I mean, to think that they're not being as calculated as possible, if they're not trying to be as precise as possible. That's a better term, precise. Think of what Nancy Pelosi said there. As you have campuses erupting with this anti-Semitic language and protests, we recognize Israel's right to protect itself. We reject the policies and the practices of Netanyahu. Terrible. What could be worse than what has been done in response? She also saying, I don't know whether he's afraid of peace, incapable of peace, or just doesn't want peace, but he has been an obstacle to the two-state solution. All right. Okay, well, we got to take a break. But comment from a viewer. The Democrats always put themselves in a sticky situation. They push to divide us into smaller groups and want us to dislike the groups we are in. This philosophy is to divide and conquer. Then they want us to believe they're working in the best interest of all of us, trying to unite us, so we vote for them. That's a good point. Yeah. I think this is what so eye-opening, though, what's happening on college campuses, that yes, they do try to divide us, but this is... Listen, we've seen some crazy protests in the past, very obnoxious things being done with roads closed and like that. But the outright celebration of hate and vitriol, and not on a certain policy matter, it's all about a group of people that this is targeting. And we're going to talk about this in the next hour, but Benjamin Weingarten says barbaric anti-Israel protesters. I kind of like that term, barbaric. We've got a lot we're going to talk about in the next hour. We're also going to hear from our friend Chris Callas. We've got guests coming up all week. Don't forget, I know we'll talk a little bit about the New York State budget just quickly. Just got a couple small updates in the next hour, but Assemblyman Phil Palmisano will be on the program on Friday in the 7 o'clock hour. So get your questions in if you have any questions regarding the budget or just what's happening in Albany. He loves when we have an opportunity to ask those questions. So Assemblyman Phil Palmisano will be in on the program on Friday. And tomorrow, I believe, still working out some of the information, but we'll be talking with representatives from Elmira Little Theater for a nice little interview, so you'll want to tune in for that as well. Tune in every weekday morning. You never know who's going to be on Frankly Speaking. That's what I would say. So a little bit more about college campuses. A couple things here. If you want to talk about Trump's trial, I do think there's a really interesting piece this morning about from Jonathan Turley, who we mentioned yesterday. But his basically takeaway from Alvin Bragg's case is Alvin Bragg has his Trump trial. All he needs now is a crime. And I think it's kind of interesting. So hopefully we have an opportunity to get to all of that. But that is at the New York Post if we don't have an opportunity to mention. But that's Jonathan Turley, who's been, I think, writes really great pieces. And we reference him and quote him quite a bit. Well, we got some comments coming in. I'll read them at the top of the hour, so you'll have to stay with us. You see the number on the bottom of the screen. You can reach out to me at any time. I'd love to hear from you. Okay, anything else? Oh, hey, by the way, I mentioned this at the top of the hour. What do you think? How Mike Johnson is taming Trump and his party against all odds. At a crucial juncture, the speaker went from pandering to Trump to managing him and from challenging the Democrats to working with them. But then, on the other side of the coin, Johnson faces uphill climb to win back GOP rebels before November. Oh, boy. Mike Johnson. All right, let's take our break. We'll be right back with hour 2 of Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, please stay with us. Hour 2 of Frankly Speaking. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm your host, Frank Acom. We are broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. Not to give you a full recap of the last hour if you missed it. We've just been talking about the anti-Israel protests on college campuses. And then at Columbia, there was supposed to be a deadline last night at midnight to the students to come up with an agreement to end the encampment. They blew past that deadline. And so administrators really cracked down and said, okay, we'll give you another 48 hours. It's good point from a viewer here. First of all, I don't know the demographics of the student body. I wouldn't want to speculate necessarily on that because I don't know. I know the pictures that I've seen, and a lot of these students look kind of like the stereotype of the privileged, fraternity or sorority sister. I don't know how to describe it. But this is a good point. If anything, here it is. As I've said before, this is from a viewer. As I said before, I would be outraged that I'm sending my child to an institution of higher learning, spending $90,000 a year, and have them sit in their dorm room and having to remotely learn. Their parents should receive refunds. Yes, especially at an important time of the year, at the end of semester. There should be refunds. I know former governor of Arkansas, Mike Huckabee, saying similar that this is a breach of contract. Yes, imagine your last few days in school and you have to do it remotely because you are not guaranteed safety. That's what going to be your last thoughts as you maybe graduate or the end of the semester. That the school that you are paying somewhere between $70,000 and $90,000 for, right? That they cannot ensure your safety. That they are more concerned with the anti-Semitic and anti-Israel protesters than they are with, and it's not just it is mainly the Jewish community is worried about their safety, but it's also in general, people are fearful. And there's that peer pressure idea where you have to join our cause. So you might want to walk to class and all of a sudden the protesters are saying, why aren't you screaming the loudest about your support for Hamas? Why aren't you being anti-Semitic? The mob mentality. Don't think for a moment there hasn't been a lot of people that got involved that didn't want to get involved, but the peer pressure became too much. So, as I mentioned, Benjamin Weingarten said barbaric anti-Israel protesters are causing mayhem at the gates of Columbia University. The Jews were made to feel unsafe. To walk the Columbia University campus Passover Eve in 2024, fearing risk of assault from unchecked promoters of genocidal jihadism and the destruction of Israel, America, and the Judeo-Christian West is a complete and utter disgrace. It is also the logical conclusion of the progressives' long march through the institutions. Absent a massive sea change, not just Jews, but all Americans will bear the brunt of the ceding of schools to those who would destroy the very civilization from which they sprang. Yes, the irony, of course, of these student student body and the faculty that are protesting, living in a country that they do not like, that they seriously dislike, as we've seen burning of American flags, that they have the right to say those things, and yet they still have this hatred. Because back to my point that the same group is also very much in line with the defund the police movement. They're also in line with this, as they're saying here, the destruction of America as we know it, and their hatred for American values. Our elite academic institutions, and shamefully, Benjamin Weingarten said, my alma mater, which at its literal core, its core curriculum, mandates the study of a Western canon that contains the ideas of liberty and justice and emphasizes the pursuit of virtue and excellence on which America is based, have for decades been petri dishes of left-wing radicalism that reject these noble ideas. Jew hatred has in recent decades increasingly become a central feature of the radicalism, in no small part through the overlapping ideologies and interests of the Western left and Islamic supremists. The subject of my, anyway, he talks about his book and all that, but I do think it's very interesting, you know, when you see some of these people supporting Hamas, outright supporting Hamas, what it would look like for them in Iran, in Palestine, in wherever. It's in Gaza, I should say, in wherever. They don't realize, because they're in this bubble, they don't realize how cushy they have it. But ultimately, the Colombia crisis illustrates the stark choice we face as a country. Do we abide the barbarism celebrated by the school's genocidal jihadist promoters and ultimately succumb to them? Or do we instead do justice to the names of those etched into the Butler Library facade that looms over them and defend our civilization? That's from Benjamin Weingarten. You can find that full piece for yourself. There's a couple others. Michael Goodwin says, this is no 1960s love-in during anti-Israel rallies at elite universities. Amid the disruption of elite universities across the nation, it is tempting to compare the student protests over Gaza to uprisings during the war. But he says it's not. I don't want to go through the whole history of this. But it is a very interesting piece. It's about 4 pages. Again, it's Michael Goodwin. You can find that for yourself. But I think we've talked about that. Oh, there's another one too. Rich Lowry has Columbia University left-wing radicalism was dangerous in 1968 and is now. You can find those for yourself at the New York Post. We may get to them later. I just wanted to get that through that quickly. This is maybe an example of a different way this has been dealt with. Now, this is in the private sector. But Google did fire at least another 20 staffers in the wake of the anti-Israel sit-ins. Google fired at least 20 more workers following protests last week at the tech giant's offices over its ties to Israel, bringing the total number of terminated staff to more than 50. The group organizing the protest, called No Tech for Apartheid, said Google canned 30 workers last week, higher than the initial 28 they had announced, after staffers held sit-ins at Google's headquarters in Sunnyvale, California. Then on Monday night, Google fired over 20 more staffers, including non-participating bystanders, during last week's protest, said Jane Chung, a spokeswoman for No Tech for Apartheid. Non-participating bystanders? That seems a little bit unlikely, but Google is throwing a tantrum because the company's executives are embarrassed about the strength workers showed at last Tuesday's historic sit-ins, as well as their botched response to them, said the group in a statement. Now the corporation is lashing out at any worker that was physically in the vicinity of the protests, including those who were not at all involved in the campaign. Now, Google CEO Sundar Pichai said that the office was not an appropriate setting for debating politics. Interesting. So, yes, you just wonder, because I said it wrong before, you know, you look at these protesters, and they don't realize how good they have it and how it would be for them in Gaza, how it would be for them in Iran, if you want to talk about that, because the support they're showing is support for groups that want to see Israel wiped off the face of the earth. And you see, just anecdotally, some of the pictures from these protests, and it does not seem like they would fare well. Well, we know they wouldn't be allowed to protest in those locations, and that has become really their bread and butter, their lifeline. That's their hobby. And really, that is, again, it goes back to my argument that the way to be cool now is to be woke. It's not about rock and roll and parties and things like that. It is to be the most vocal one at a protest. It is the one to show you're the most aggrieved, you care the most, and in this situation, hate the most. Anyway, I think we've focused on that for long enough this morning. I did want to remind you on a completely different note as we completely change topics. Don't forget, today is the nutrition workshop at the Painted Post Food Pantry. All workshops include 35 to 40-minute lessons, a recipe demonstration with samples, and a free kitchen tool for every participant. Lessons, recipe, and kitchen tools are different every time. It is today from 10:30 to 11:30 at the United Church of Painted Post, 201 North Hamilton Street in Painted Post. Hopefully we'll have some pictures for you tomorrow. See what they made. I think you'll like that event if you can attend it today from 10:30 to 11:30 at the United Church of Painted Post. We got to take our first break of the second hour. We're going to change up the topic. Did you see what Biden had to say yesterday on the campaign trail? A little bit of a gaffe. We'll mention that. A few things about Trump's trial. Also, coming up around 7:20, we'll talk with Chris Callas about the upcoming college fair, which is May 8th from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Elmira Elks Lodge, 300 East Gray Street in Elmira. So stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. Our beautiful view of Market Street as we broadcast live. This is Frankly Speaking. Thank you so much for joining us. Did you see what good point from a viewer? Nancy Pelosi telling Netanyahu to resign. That's the joke of the day, excuse me. Nancy Pelosi telling Netanyahu to resign. How has Israel managed this long without her infinite wisdom? Yes, it's the same with Chuck Schumer. To me, they've got to be happy in Israel that Netanyahu's in charge and not the leaders that we have over here that are constantly weakening, whether it's Biden on his stance on Israel, Schumer on his stance on Israel, or if you go to even the weakening of leadership like in places on college campuses. What foreign country, what they must be thinking right now when they see these protests and see Americans supporting essentially our enemies and protesting against our ally. I mean, you don't think for a moment that China, Russia, Iran aren't laughing at what is happening on college campuses, and also the colleges not knowing how to handle it because they don't want to upset radical protesters. Anyway, I said I was going to move on here. President Joe Biden made a little bit of a mistake on the campaign trail yesterday, saying, folks, in a sense, I don't know why we're surprised by Trump. How many times does he have to prove we can't be trusted? Yes, you heard me right. President Biden saying, folks, in a sense, I don't know why we're surprised by Trump. How many times does he have to prove we can't be trusted? Now, I guess the 81-year-old was slamming his Republican opponent for the repeal of women's reproductive and health care rights across the country, according to the New York Post. Instead of saying he, meaning Trump, he said we can't be trusted. I like that line. How many times does he have to prove we can't be trusted? All right, let's do the takeaways from day 6 of the Donald Trump criminal hush money trial. I like that. I don't even know how to address this in a way. I like how the media is making a big deal that the National Enquirer made up the story about Ted Cruz's father and Lee Harvey Oswald. Did a lot of people, and then I'm asking the question, maybe you did, I don't know. Did a lot of people believe that to be factually accurate? I remember, it's just a weird story. I didn't bring it up, of course, but that week when that story broke, I actually interviewed Ted Cruz's father on my radio show. I did not bring that up because it was kind of, I think, a Rafael Cruz. I think it was probably a little bit of a sore spot. Trump repeatedly referred to the story on the campaign trail and in interviews. I mean, what was he doing? What was he doing with Lee Harvey Oswald shortly before the shooting? Trump said in an interview. It's horrible. Now, they asked Pecker about this yesterday during the hearing, and he said, we mashed the photos in the different picture with Lee Harvey Oswald and mashed the two together, and that's how the story was created, I would say. I don't know. I guess I'm not really that surprised by that story, but let's go through the real takeaways. According to CNN, who continues to call the college campus protests pro-Palestinian. So there will be no, just to keep you updated, there will be no trial today. Wednesdays are the day off. But gag order hearing goes badly for Trump. Judge Merchant issued the gag order before the trial began, limiting Trump from publicly discussing witnesses, the jury, or the district attorney's staff. Merchant explained the order, which Trump has appealed, to cover his own family after Trump attacked his daughter. He has not yet ruled on the district attorney's motion to sanction Trump for allegedly violating the gag order, but it wasn't hard to tell the judge's sentiment. Merchant rejected the explanation that Trump attorney Todd Blanche offered for the offending post. Yeah, didn't he say something like you're losing all credibility or something? I mean, well, it goes back to what we were talking about yesterday with lawfare, right? So when Blanche tried to argue that Trump's response to a Cohen post about Michael Avenatti, Daniel's former lawyer, was political because it discussed pardons, the judge grew frustrated. So the pardon is what makes it political? The judge asked. Of course. When your client is violating a gag order, I expect more than one word, Merchant said. Anyway, that was one of the big takeaways. Well, we got to take a break because I do have Chris Callas. He's going to be on in just a moment about the college fair coming up on May 8th. Judge says Trump's lawyers are losing all credibility. And this was with the gag order because the headline was attention grabbing, right? That's what they went with. Judge says Trump's lawyers losing all credibility. So I myself fell into the trap and clicked on it to see what it was in reference to, and it was about the gag order. You've presented nothing, Merchant said to Blanche. I've asked you 8 or 9 times to show me the exact post he was responding to. You've been unable to do that even once. Blanche said, President Trump is being very careful to comply with your order. That's when Merchant jumped in and said, you're losing all credibility with the court. The gag order, you can tell I shouldn't say the case it's not boring, but it's not really what the media's expected so far because the whole story has been about the gag orders. Then they talked about how supposedly this group that Pecker worked with helped Trump in the 2016 campaign. He also placed Michael Cohen deep in the conspiracy. That's CNN being unbiased there. Deep in the conspiracy. So anyway, that's what CNN said. I know we don't focus too much on it, but I wanted to give you a little update. Now, coming up in just a moment, we're going to talk with Chris Callas about the upcoming college fair on May 8th. From 6 to 8 p.m. at the Elmira Elks Lodge. Feel free to weigh in at any time. Thank you to everybody for all the waves and for the comments so far. I know I wrapped up our discussion on Columbia, but feel free to at any point weigh in on that or just what's happening on college campuses in general, about the trial yesterday. Any of the topics of the day, you can change it up completely. Talk local. Talk state. We do have a couple of New York State budget issues that we may get to when we are done talking with Mr. Callas. So stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox, broadcasting from the Hasselson studio. Chris, thanks so much for being on the program this morning.
Thanks for having me, Frank. I really appreciate it.
It's that time of year already.
It is, believe it or not. The year is almost here.
The college fair, May 8th at the Elmira Elks Lodge from 6 to 8 p.m. How long have you been holding these?
Well, this would be my 14th year.
I wondered. Wow.
My 14th year, yep. And, of course, COVID, stopped it for 2 years.
Sure.
But we're back bigger and better than ever, and this is going to be the year that I think we're going to break an attendance record.
Why did you decide to do this in the first place? Did you see a need in our community for something like this?
Without question. So when I got elected to the Elmira Heights School Board back in 2010, I spoke to the superintendent at the time, Mary Beth Fiore, and I talked to her about a college fair, and because my master's in higher education administration.
Sure.
And I was working higher at the time, and I said, we should do something, and she said, great, and she was 100% behind this. So we decided to start this, and it originally started at the Thomas Edison High School.
Okay.
Is where it started. But there was a need because you have seniors juniors, and we used to call him Larry come lately from Long Beach, that would wake up around August and say, hey, I need to go to school. So we're trying to get them students to, and adults who want to come back to school, a second chance. So not just one in the fall, but one in the spring.
Right.
Now we're the only show in town. The only one in the whole North Penn area.
That's amazing, because there obviously is a need. I'm looking at the list of some of the people that you'll have there, and it's not just, maybe you're thinking I need something maybe a little different right now, or it's not just colleges and universities, but a topic that we talk on this program about all the time, police, the need for police. Well, the New York State Police are going to be there. You have trade schools. How much work goes into the planning of this, contacting these people?
It starts every year. It starts right now.
Yeah,
it starts right now. So I figure, what can I talk about on this show that I didn't talk about maybe last year?
Yeah.
The planning goes every day. I'm talking to people. I'm out talking to someone saying, hey, I want to be a sponsor. Hey, I need to bring my grandkids to this, or I want to talk to someone. I saw you on the Big Fox TV show with Frank Acom, and thank you for watching. But my point is, the planning starts every day. Every day I get an idea. Oh, I should talk to this person. Oh, I should talk to that person. We should invite these ones. Now, like this year, and we did it last year, we have a table set up, but this year different is we have Elmira Police Department will be there recruiting cadets like last year. Mayor Mandel will be there. Also, the city manager, Mr. Collins, will be there. They want to be on board with this. I spoke to him last week. Also, the Elmira Fire Department will be there with cadets looking to recruit more people. I also have the state police who always come every year, have a big presence. They'll be there. And I also, this year is the first year, the DEC will be there.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, they're going to be there. And the DEC is great. And they're going to be coming also. So we've got a big police presence. We have the fire department there. So it's not just colleges. These are programs that will get you right into working.
Wow. Yeah, it's a really extensive and impressive list. Do you find that colleges and universities and some of these organizations start to contact you because you've been doing it so long?
Yes, they do. Yeah. I've actually had several. Actually, my wife has. Got to give a shout out to my beautiful wife, Lindsay, who's been my administrator, and my very good friend, Chris Giaconda, who's my IT guy, who puts everything together for me on these flyers that you see.
Yeah.
And they'll be reaching out to them on the Facebook page. And Elmira Elks College Fair, if you're looking for it. It's updated almost every day with a new school that's coming or sponsor. Mm-hmm. And they'll say, hey, we registered last year. Are you doing it again this year? They'll start reaching out in December.
Yeah.
Because they're planning for their spring travel season.
And you have such amazing sponsors, too. I'm sure that they want to be a part of it because it's such an important part for our community.
It is.
It plays such an important role. So everybody wants to be attached to something like this, I would think.
Yeah. Well, it's an educational community event.
Yeah.
I mean, what better to be part of?
You're right.
So if you're listening to me, anybody that wants to be a sponsor, we'd love to have you. It's not too late. You can reach out to me, Chris Callas. I'm in the phone book. I still have a landline. They can call me. They can go on the website here and reach out to me. But it'd be great for more people, even elected officials, let's say, that say, hey, I want to be a sponsor of this. As you can see, we have Rodney Strange
is on there.
And Marty Chalk.
Oh, yeah.
And then, of course, we have some local city people in Elmira that are going to be on here, too, that I'd like to make sure that, like with Nick, that he's on here. He's an elected city councilman in Elmira.
Okay. Wow, you do have a...
Yes, and you can see him on here. But my point is, it's open to everybody's sponsorship, pretty much, and we'd love to have them. Frank, I'm going to put it right out there. This would not be possible without our sponsors.
Oh, of course.
I couldn't do it without Hilliard's. I could go right down the list, as you can see. Stevie Pickering, the 8th District legislator. Yeah. As I mentioned, the different ones.
I'll put up the poster so everybody can see the various sponsors. Unless you want to read through them, but I do have to mention our good friend Culligan Water.
Yeah, of course. Culligan Water is great.
Yeah.
They jumped on board, as you can see. Culligan Water is right behind me.
Exactly.
It's delicious. It's refreshing. It's nutritious.
Yep.
And we're going to have it at the college fair, giving it out to people. So thank you, Culligan Water.
Yes.
And the other part, too, is the different sponsors that jump on board. Now, this year, we've got Mooney's.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Is going to be giving us mac and cheese.
Oh, that's great.
What better than that mac and cheese? The JB Bulldogs Cafe up in Elmira Heights, Jeremy Gulich, he's going to be doing a pulled pork tray
that's a great
with buns, which is awesome. And, of course, we have different people that donate other foods, which is great. Sam's Club has been a ¡1 sponsor. Got to give a shout-out to Dave Mustico and the group up at the Horseheads Sam's Club. They're awesome. They help us out with all types of things. The different ones that are on here and that are coming in the next 2 weeks, because we've got 2 weeks from today is to the college fair. So it's not too late. Please contact me if you want to be a sponsor.
Do you find that when people attend that they're there for almost a full 2 hours?
It varies. It varies. My goal would to be everybody there for 2 hours.
Right, sure.
I'd like to. my thought for next year, you talked about planning, is next year I would like to, unless the sponsor calls in the meantime, I would like to have a instant college fair scholarship given out at the end of the night.
Oh, that's a great idea.
I would like to do that because I think that would make people stay, do the drawing right there. We can cut you the check on the spot.
Right.
We just need the sponsorship to make it happen.
Right.
But that way you'd have the kids stick around to 8 o'clock, and maybe one of our elected officials could come down and do the drawing for us.
Sure. When you mention the attendees, what should they know about the event? Is there anything that they should bring?
Well, first and foremost, you want to bring your questions.
Yeah.
You want to bring your questions and a list of questions, because there's nothing that a college fair representative doesn't want is someone just standing looking at you.
Yeah, sure.
You want to ask questions. Where are you located?
Tuition.
What does it cost?
Yeah.
That's a reality check that grandma and grandpa, mom and dad, are going to be standing there wanting to know also. Also, do you offer financial aid? Which most of them all do, of course.
Sure.
But then, of course, the other thing is, too, when is the deadline to apply? Is it the SAT and ACT? What are the scores? Or you don't need those at that particular school? Now, that's a big trend that's been happening.
Sure.
They don't
I've heard
require
that.
them. And the other thing is, too, what are you looking at? Top 10% of your class? Top 20%. You want to ask them questions. When can I visit? If I fill out a form, can you waive my application fee?
Right.
There's ways to save money with going to school.
And it's important because it's costly now. And
It's
that's
very
why I think this
costly.
is great that you put this on so people have so many alternatives, so many different areas that they can go down depending on what they're interested in. Are you still looking for people to participate, meaning schools and organizations?
So because we're at the Elmira Elks, it's not the Jacob Javits Center in New York City.
Right.
So even though I was asked how big it has been with the Army to bring some things, we only have a few slots left.
Okay.
And that is a great turnout. I try to cap it at 50, but because we get such people that show up, and we have some that don't show up, of course.
Yeah.
That register, then all of a sudden they don't show up. We have a few more spots open, just a few, but we're almost at that 50 spot that are coming in fast and furious. So if you can see me and hear me, make it happen as soon as possible, because I am going to fortunately have to start turning people away.
Sure. And we want to make sure that everybody knows, again, it's May 8th, 6 to 8 p.m. at the Elmira Elks Lodge, but it is free and open to the public.
It is free, and we have free parking. Also, the Elmira Pioneers will be there giving out free
great.
tickets.
Yeah.
Stitches will be there, as always. He's a staple.
Yeah.
Thank you, Robbie Nichols and the
course.
Pioneers. And they'll be there giving out tickets. And, of course, it is free. It costs nothing to come down. And most importantly is you come down and you ask your questions. You get with your guidance counselors from your high school, your student counselors, school counselors, that is, and talk to them. What are the lists that you suggest I ask them? Is it a big school? Is it a small school? What's the student to faculty ratio? Can I bring a car on campus?
Right.
Those are all important things. Even can I bring a pet?
Right.
Some campuses are pet friendly. Let you bring your pet.
Oh, wow. Times have changed.
Yes, they have, very much so.
Well, these colleges want to have the students too, so it's a mutual kind of a back and forth. So that's why, again, I say it, but it's a great event, and I appreciate you for coming into the program to talk about it. And let's do this again soon before the event. Does that sound good?
I would like to, Frank, and as always, thanks for having me.
Yep, of course. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV, Big Fox. We are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom. Thank you to Chris Callas for being on the program this morning to tell us about the college fair coming up. Something completely different before we get back into the trial of Trump. I just saw this as I was reading through some news articles. If you are a fan of Johnny Cash, I told you it's going to be something completely different. Lost Johnny Cash songs, I should put it that way. Lost Johnny Cash songs from 1993 are going to be released as a new album. 11 previously unreleased songs by Johnny Cash, which the country star recorded as demos back in 1993 but never completed, are to finally see the light of day on a new album entitled Songwriter, which is due out on June the 28th. Featuring guest appearances by country singer Vince Gill and rock band The Black Keys, the demos have been worked up into finished versions and recorded by a crack team of musicians who previously played with Cash, including guitarist Marty Stewart, drummer Pete Abbott, and prior to his death in 2023, upright bassist Dave Rowe. Cash's vocal performances from the demo recordings have been added on top. That's just kind of something different. Thought that was kind of neat. All right. So Jonathan Turley, I mentioned this piece earlier on. And he says, for many of us in the legal community, Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg's case against former President Trump borders on the legally obscene. an openly political prosecution based on a theory even legal pundits dismiss. Yet Monday, the prosecution seemed to actually make a case for obscenity. The prosecution must show Trump falsified business records in furtherance of another crime. After months of confusion on just what crime underpinned the indictment, the prosecution offered a new theory, so ambiguous and undefined. Prosecutor Joshua Steinglass told the jury that in listing Stormy Daniels' payments as a legal expense, Trump violated a New York law, quote, any two or more persons who conspire to promote or prevent the election of any person to a public office by unlawful means, and which conspiracy is acted upon by one or more of the parties thereto, shall be guilty of a misdemeanor. So Trump committed a crime by conspiring to unlawfully promote his own candidacy, by paying to quash a potentially embarrassing story and then reimbursing his lawyer, Michael Cohen, with other legal expenses. Confused? You are not alone. It's not a crime to pay for the non-disclosure of an alleged affair. It is also not a federal election offense, the other underlying crime Bragg alleges, to pay such money as a personal or legal expense. Federal law doesn't treat it as a political contribution to yourself. Yet somehow the characterization of this payment as a legal expense is an illegal conspiracy to promote one's own candidacy in New York. In New York, prosecutors are expected to have extreme legal myopia. They can see no farther than Trump, to the exclusion of any implication for the legal system or legal ethics. And that's one of the things we've talked about here on the program is people like Bragg and Letitia James, they don't worry about the precedent this sets, what this means for the future of the weaponization of the justice system, of lawfare, as some have called it. They don't care about that because the ends justify the means. That they care about right now getting Trump. And remember, we're told time and time again that Trump is a threat to democracy. As they try to take him off the ballot, as they try to use the court system to bring him down. Of course, neither Bragg nor his office has ever seen this type of criminal case in any other defendant. Ever. We've never seen a case like this one where a dead misdemeanor from 2016 could be revived as a felony just before the 2024 election. The statute of limitations for the case's misdemeanor, including falsifying payments, has expired. But Bragg, with the help of counsel and former top Biden Justice Department official Matthew Colangelo, zapped it back into life by alleging a federal election crime the Justice Department itself rejected as a basis for any criminal charge. It's not clear Trump even knew how this money was characterized in records. He paid it to his lawyer, who had put together the settlement over the non-disclosure agreement. Cohen will soon go on the stand and tell the jury it should send his former client to jail for following his legal advice. Besides running for president, Trump was married and had hosted a hit television show. There were ample reasons to secure an NDA to bury the story. Even if it was done with the election in mind, it is not unusual or illegal. There is generally no need to list such payments as a campaign contribution because the federal government doesn't see them as a campaign contribution. It's not even clear how the matter was supposed to be noted in record. What if the Trump employee put legal settlement in personal matter or nuisance payment? The crime itself may not be clear or even comprehensible, but the defendant's identity could not be clearer, and the prosecutors are hoping the jury, like themselves, will look no further. I thought that was a very good piece from Jonathan Turley that I wanted to mention to you. Okay. Mitt Romney already thinks Trump's guilty. Mitt Romney, huh? Right? He renders his verdict already as the trial begins. I think everybody has made their own assessment of President Trump's character. And so far as I know, you don't pay someone $130,000 not to have a relationship with you. We'll put that in case it's, I think it's spring break if kids are watching. All right, the Senate did pass the bill forcing TikTok's parent company to sell or face a ban. We can talk about that if you would like. But when we come back from break, I want to talk a few things because I don't want to run out of time. I want to talk about a few things in regards to New York State. We also have a couple other stories we may get to. We can go back if you want and talk about what's happening at Columbia. I know I've been talking about it all morning, but if you're just joining us, there was the deadline of midnight last night They blew past that. So now they have 48 hours of students to keep negotiating. The students make it sound like there's nothing more to talk about. Why the administration is signaling that they're willing to negotiate with terrorists, I don't understand anyway. But they are saying, no, it's 48 hours now, and the negotiations are going great. Then the students say they're not going great. They're not going to be, quote unquote, intimidated and threatened. And the list of demands or the list of changes that they wanted from the administration were as weak as taking down some of the tents. So it's just something I know I've talked a lot about this week, but something that I find very fascinating. So I hope you do too, and that you would like to weigh in on it. But we've got to take our short break. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. We are back with Frankly Speaking. Sorry, I just had a couple of stories that I wanted to bring to you. I just ran over the copy here. This coming from the New York Post, kind of breaking news. Riot police surrounded Columbia University tent city as deadline is extended for demonstrators to leave. Columbia University will continue discussions with anti-Israel student protesters to reach an agreement on a plan to dismantle their encampment for the next 48 hours after, as I mentioned, that deadline passed. Riot police were seen assembling overnight. As university spokesperson said, university administrators made important progress with representatives of the student encampment. Probably didn't make that great of a progress if you thought now was the time to send in riot police. University President Shafiq initially set a Wednesday midnight deadline for them to clear out before the school would consider alternative options to remove the tent city. However, just past midnight, the Students for Justice in Palestine, Columbia University Apartheid Divest, posted on X that it had left talks with the school until there's a written commitment that the administration will not be unleashing the NYPD or the National Guard on its students. As I mentioned, House Speaker Mike Johnson is going to hold a press conference from there today. Also, maybe something that sparked this, a radical anti-Israel activist told Columbia students there is nothing wrong with being a fighter in Hamas, weeks before the campus exploded in these anti-Israel protests. In a 2-hour tirade to the hardest core of anti-Israel activists at Columbia and its sister college, Barnard, Charlotte Cates, the international coordinator of the Palestinian Prisoner Solidarity Network, said these are the people who are on the front lines defending Palestine and fighting for its liberation. All right, maybe what led this all along. Okay, I know. Moving along. Okay. Two things here about New York. First, I wanted to mention this because I thought it was very forceful. And this is coming from New York State of Politics. One sheriff's deputy and one police officer were killed in a single incident near the city of Syracuse last week, as you recall. A third police officer was shot and killed in New York City during a routine traffic stop in late March. A fourth officer was seriously injured last week in a shooting in Albany. That officer will reportedly need months of physical therapy to recover. Well, Sheriff Craig Dumont, the president of the New York State Sheriff's Association, said, "I think we need to do something to end the open season on police officers. We have done some tweaking of bail reform over the past couple of years, and for that we are grateful, but clearly we have to do more." Yes, I understand he's playing a little politics there, saying, yeah, we're glad we got anything. But the fact of the matter is a lot more needs to be done. And it seems like every little tweak that we make, there's 10 other bad laws coming up behind it, doesn't it? I will say, it speaks volumes when you look at that there was a fight, though ultimately it was successful in a good way, but that there was that fight over tougher penalties for people that randomly or just in general attack retail employees. Well, anyway, Chris Churchill at the Times Union says nothing in the New York State budget is going to make you less grumpy. Okay? In a worrying new Marist poll, and this speaks to, we had a viewer yesterday, and it might have been actually from Monday but I didn't read it till yesterday, saying that they've had enough with the school taxes, the state taxes, the county taxes. They just had too much. They're going to start looking to move. Well, in this Marist poll, listen to this number. An eye-popping 37% of New Yorkers said they plan to leave the state within 5 years. We've talked about this in the past on the program, that there's this 5-year plan that many New Yorkers have where it's, okay, I can't do it right now, but maybe when the kids leave or maybe when I retire or whatever, we're going to make that 5-year plan. 37% of New Yorkers have the 5-year plan. Now, according to Chris Churchill, that is not good, and we can only hope most don't mean it, given the catastrophe that will result if they follow through. But the number does reflect the widespread grumpiness and dissatisfaction among New Yorkers right now, a sentiment also expressed in a separate poll from the Siena College Research Institute. In that poll, released Monday, Governor Kathy Hochul recorded her worst favorability and job approval ratings, while just 35% of respondents said New York is on the right track, even though this very blue state is completely controlled by Democrats. It goes to show you, you keep voting the same way and you wonder why. 37% said New York is on the right track. I even think that's high. But both the Siena and Marist poll were finished before the legislature and Hochul agreed over the weekend on a new state budget. So could that change their mind? No. So far as I can tell, says Chris Churchill, there's little in the spending plan that will improve. Well, anything or stem New York's worst in the nation population outflow, which you would think would be considered a massive crisis down at the Capitol, but it isn't. No, they keep putting through these radical ideas. They keep putting through these policies like bail reform and others that are causing people to say enough is enough. I worry about my safety, my family's safety, whatever the case may be. They have had enough. And they apparently aren't concerned about it in Albany. But I'm hardly a budget expert, he said, so I asked E.J. McMahon, founding senior fellow over at the Empire Center for Public Policy, if he'd found anything that might encourage New York residents to stick around. In a word, no, McMahon said. In 3 words, not one thing. So I wish I had better news for you, says Churchill. I wish I could report that New York's lawmakers are deeply concerned about the departures of your neighbors and loved ones and are determined to do the hard work of addressing the problem. Alas, there's no evidence that's true at all. And he talks about $237 billion budget. Just 40% of state residents in the survey of registered voters have a favorable view of Hochul, which puts the Democrats only slightly ahead of Donald Trump and his 37% favorability. And did I mention this is one of the nation's bluest states, supposedly? Well, this is the policies that more than half, 55% say crime in New York. Where do you hear this line? Crime in New York has gotten worse in the last year. A sentiment that doesn't seem borne out by official crime stats. The poll doesn't ask if anyone trusts the accuracy of those stats. And 76% say shoplifting is a major problem for stores, a sentiment that, judging by having to ask a clerk to unlock toenail clippers and bars of soap, seems reasonable. Also, another issue that people take very seriously, migrants. A full 82% think the recent influx of migrants into New York is a serious problem. 82, which is as close to a consensus as we're likely to get. But 58% disapprove of the way Hochul is addressing the crisis, while 62% dislike how the Biden administration is handling it, or to be more accurate, not handling it. So anyway, he said, even though nothing in the budget seems likely to make New Yorkers less grumpy, we can always wait until next year. Well, will we? Some people are coming up on their 5-year plans, aren't they? We've heard from a lot of you, and I don't say this with glee. It's sad. You hate to see this happen in this state, but Albany isn't taking it seriously. And they keep putting in rules that make it less safe, that coddle criminals, that tie the hands of the police. It cost us a fortune. Yeah, I don't know. This is a good question. I don't know how long a protest would last on college campuses if they didn't receive the platform to be vocal. I mean, that's maybe one reason why Columbia is asking. And thank you. I'm glad that you like the coverage of it. I do think it's a very important issue, and I think that's why it's worth spending so much time on, because it's not just going to stay on college campuses, folks. I think we always do ourselves a disservice when we kind of laugh at, these crazy kids. Wait till they get in the real world. Well, the real world is changing for them in a lot of disastrous ways. So, yeah, if they didn't have the platform, I will say the platform there amongst themselves is what it is. I don't know how much of a platform they're having elsewhere. I mean, I know the media is covering it, but they're not really covering all the speeches and like that. I don't know. That's a fair question. I don't have an answer for you. Let's see. Not sure if this dangerous situation is getting the attention that it should from the people that it should. I'm going to assume you mean at college campuses. Yeah, I don't think people, let's face it, there's a lot of people in the Democrat Party that we've seen recently that have the same types of sentiment with that anti-Israel belief. So I don't think a lot of the powers that be want to see this end. I just think many of them don't like the public relations of it all. To finally expose for many, most of us knew, but to expose for many, if not all, how radicalized college campuses have become with their indoctrination. We got to take our last break, though, because I got to get a sip of water. Stay with us. Our beautiful view as we broadcast live from the Hesselson studio. I got a little bit of a frog in my throat. I apologize. So the Washington Post, their editors say, if you want to rebuild middle America, look towards mass immigration. Depopulation is bad for economies. Housing prices tank. Local tax revenue collapses. The labor force shrinks. Business go bust or leave. Schools close. There would be upfront costs. Shuttered schools would need to be refurbished. Local services might be strained at first. I'm just kind of skipping around here. Given an initial boost, perhaps with state funds as well as migrant savings, they could help build a future for places that today don't seem to have one. Now, is this trying to throw a distraction in there? Because the voters have showed overwhelmingly that they do not like the president's open, porous borders. And that ties in with a piece that we will not have time to get to, but it's at Fox News, and it's by Bradford Betts. FBI Director Christopher Wray has been sounding the alarm on heightened threat environment. But is America listening? And it goes through some of the real issues that we have, like we've talked about so often on this program. China spending drastically more on military than declared. German lawmakers aid. I'm going through too much here. Border, the border. The Senate won't pass border security. Terrorism. Just a really interesting piece. Oh, we're getting a late wave right there at the end here. So if you get an opportunity for that, there's also a piece. And what is your thoughts? How Mike Johnson is taming Trump and his party against all odds. But then the next piece from a different outlet. Johnson faces uphill climb to win back the GOP rebels before November. Those two pieces that I didn't have an opportunity to get to. This is no 1960s lovin' during anti-Israel rallies at elite universities. But then there's Rich Lowry has a different take. Columbia University left-wing radicalism was dangerous in 1968 and is now. All right, we are out of time for today's edition of Frankly Speaking. Thank you to Chris Callas for being our guest. The College Fair coming up May 8th from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Elmira Elks Lodge. So appreciate him being on the show. Tomorrow we should have the Elmira Little Theater, some guests on from there, and then Friday, Assemblyman Phil Palmisano. So get your questions into that number on the bottom of the screen at any time. I would love to hear from you. And look how many waves we got today. We did real good. So I appreciate that. I appreciate all the back and forth comments. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about college campuses tomorrow. We'll see how those negotiations are going. So we'll talk about that and all the issues of the day. But that does it for today's edition. So thank you again for joining us. And please join us tomorrow morning starting at 6 for Frankly Speaking, only on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Have a great day, everyone.